Hello everyone, my name is Alberto Marquez. In this video we will discuss the background and overall layout of the Port Planning and Investment Toolkit. The American Association of Port Authorities and the U.S. Department of Transportation, through the Maritime Administration, organized a team of port industry experts throughout the U.S. to develop this Port Planning and Investment Toolkit. The toolkit provides port owners with information and practices to assist when planning and evaluating projects that require financing and/or funding from public, private, or combined sources. It also outlines the steps and processes used by planning professionals and financiers, which may be new to some port professionals and staff and commissioners. U.S. ports move billions of tons of goods today and need significantly more capacity to handle the peak cargo volumes projected into the future. This requires costly investment in port infrastructure and equipment. Because these rapidly growing capital needs cannot be fully met from traditional revenue sources, port owners have sought innovative methods to finance infrastructure investment by engaging with new, larger casts of public and private partners. These partners must have access to in-depth planning, environmental assessment, outreach, feasibility, and financial analysis outcomes before determining whether to provide funds for a project under consideration. Port owners have emphasized the need for a resource to guide them as they prepare plans, evaluate the feasibility, and estimate the financial performance of their projects to attract public and private investment. Such a resource would assist them in reaching their goal of obtaining funding and financing for the implementation of critical development, expansion, repair, and upgrade projects. The toolkit is intended to be useful for owners of ports of all sizes and with all the markets by helping to outline the steps for successful project definition and implementation through articulating assumptions, clarifying ambiguities, quantifying details, and identifying the important considerations to achieve project funding or financing. It is also intended to be useful for port professional staff with technical responsibilities to present their plans for a project and its associated benefits to executives and governing boards. In this video, we will discuss the toolkit contents to guide users when accessing the various resources in the toolkit. The toolkit is comprised of 3 modules that are aligned with the 3 primary stages involved in project definition: planning, feasibility, and financing. The toolkit also contains multiple appendices, a resource catalog, and a port concession evaluation model. The planning module provides guidance to the toolkit user when beginning to identify factors that must be addressed when planning a potential port project. This module provides clearly defined steps of the planning efforts needed to support a financeable project. The feasibility module addresses the process of refining a project plan by considering all aspects of cost, risk, and reward. This module includes approaches for measuring and evaluating the benefits and costs of project alternatives created during the planning stage. The financial module describes different approaches for evaluating project financing strategies and identifying ways to obtain grant funding and public-private financing. It includes examples of financing strategy solutions designed to address a variety of needs. Appendices are included to provide usable resources related to each module. The glossary of terms defines the terminology that is used throughout the toolkit, providing a common basis of communication. Project profiles include description of how different real-world projects were approached, providing toolkit users with examples that demonstrate best practices in port planning, feasibility analysis, and financing. Throughput capacity provides detail related to the variables and modeling approach that should be considered in assessing a port's practical capacity. Forecasting trade demand summarizes the challenges of developing a port-specific trade forecast and provides an example of the economical variables that should be considered. The resource catalog is a searchable spreadsheet that contains references and links to applicable studies and reports, academic papers, trade publications, and other pertinent material available on the subject of port planning and feasibility. The port concession evaluation model is a sample financial model provided for illustrative purposes that can be used for considering high-level concession evaluation elements. The objective of this sample model is to illustrate key elements of a financial feasibility and financing strategy analysis for a port terminal concession. The Toolkit User's Guide has been organized to help the Toolkit user quickly understand and gain access to the appropriate content of interest. 1. Context. Key terms are defined to provide a context for understanding the Toolkit intended audience and purpose. 2. Outline. A general description of the structure and content is provided to assist the user with understanding the top-level organization of the Toolkit modules. 3. Checklist. Rapid guidance to accessing specific content in each Toolkit module is provided by using the checklist at the end of the user's guide. A series of statements related to port planning, feasibility, and financing are provided along with the corresponding hyperlink to page number where each topic is addressed. This toolkit has been created to guide the definition of a project for which a port owner is seeking financing or funding. The term project financing, as used in this toolkit, refers to the means by which debt or equity is acquired to pay for a project or portion thereof, requiring the project's cash flow and assets for repayment. Project funding in this toolkit refers to the means by which internal reserves, direct usage charges or fees, or government investment are raised to obtain and use to pay for a project or portion thereof. Because the range of potential users of this toolkit is diverse, the term port owner throughout this toolkit encompasses port authorities, terminal operators, private companies, and project sponsors that own and/or operate a port. A port is considered to be a single or multiple facility entity that facilitates the transfer of cargo and/or passengers between logistically linked transport modes. For instance, truck to barge to ocean-going vessel. A port may provide services at inland multimodal facilities as well as along navigable waterways. Port developments may have multiple components that are linked together by a common objective. However, port owners seeking financing and/or funding should separate each independent component into individual projects to minimize the compounding of financial and permitting risk. Each project should have independent utility, that is, it is functional without the development or improvement of other separate assets. While the project may include sub-projects related to the phasing of project construction, these phases of the project would typically not have independent utility. A project with independent utility will have an independent development line such that its unique benefits, costs, and impacts can be clearly ascertained. Although additional benefits or costs of a project may result in the future due to synergies with other improvements at a port, the project should stand on its own merits in the event that other projects never come to fruition. The cumulative impacts of other projects that have occurred or may occur in a project area should still be considered, particularly for environmental review. Accordingly, the use of the term project throughout this toolkit comprises the acquisition, development, expansion, or renovation of a single site, facility, infrastructure element, or operational resource to meet an identified or emergent need. A project endorsed by a port owner should enable the movement of freight through a port's coastal and/or inland assets. In a given year, a port owner may undertake any one of several planning efforts as depicted in Exhibit I-1 that lead to potential port projects. Comprehensive planning outcomes typically include the identification of future port developments and potential projects. Project-specific planning efforts involve the definition of a project and culminate in a project plan in support of pursuing project financing and/or funding. Although port planning efforts occur at different stages and at varying degrees of specificity ranging from strategic to tactical, they are often interconnected such that the decision cycles resulting from one planning effort can influence the outcomes of other efforts. In addition, any of the comprehensive planning efforts can provide input into the development of project plans. And project plans, in turn, can influence the identification of other potential projects. Comprehensive planning. Identification of potential projects. Comprehensive planning efforts have been organized into three groups with associated ranges of focus: direction, long to short term; operation, external to internal focus; and resource, regional to port focus planning. Direction planning documents such as master plans and land use plans typically clarify and communicate a port's vision, goals, and objectives. This type of comprehensive planning is critical for guiding a port's owner's development and management of land, infrastructure, and facilities over a period of 10 to 20 plus years. Similarly, strategic plans typically outline a port's market position and direction, ensuring that resources are allocated to achieve the port owner's defined goals and objectives. Business and marketing plans presented short-term actions to support a port long-term plans. Port owners should undertake a direction planning effort before beginning to define specific projects, with the exception of projects that emerge suddenly. Port owners may also complete more detailed operation planning efforts to sustain or improve the port's service and address impacts resulting from the port's operation. Resource planning efforts focusing on enhancing regional and port-specific assets are most likely to generate potential projects requiring capital investment and a project plan. These three groups of comprehensive planning efforts usually involve developing or refining a port's vision, goals, and objectives; quantify a port's need, capabilities, and the gap between them; conducting outreach with the stakeholders, including the public and the nearby community, as well as the resource agencies, local, regional, state, and federal; identifying actions, developments, or improvements that can fill the gap between the needs and capabilities; considering possible social, economic, and environmental impacts and requirements. All planning efforts should proactively consider compatibility with laws and regulations that may be applicable to a potential project. Early consultation with community organizations, the public, and local, regional, state, and federal agencies will help inform the planning process going forward, expedite project developments when they come to fruition, and help to secure stakeholder support. Project definition. Once a potential project is identified as a result of a comprehensive planning effort or to address an unexpected or emergent need, the planning focus shifts to defining the project. Project-specific planning should be completed to define the exact scope and impacts of a potential project before a port owner can convince local, state, federal, and/or private partners to make monetary investments. Efforts for defining a project include establishing project needs, capabilities, opportunities, and constraints; conducting outreach with the stakeholders and resource agencies, a community, local, regional, state, and federal; demonstrating project needs, feasibility, and cost; justifying project value, benefits, and impacts; establishing the project timeline; identifying needed funding and financial sources. Activities within the structure of the project-specific planning process are often similar to comprehensive planning efforts, such as quantifying needs and capabilities, stakeholder outreach, and assessing impacts, differing plans in scale and level of detail. Thus, port owners embarking upon comprehensive planning efforts will find value in the guidance provided in the planning and feasible modules of this toolkit. The project definition process and formulation of a project plan are simultaneous processes that consist of a series of stages to establish that a potential project is feasible and to advance into a financeable project. The toolkit is structured to follow this natural progression of a project through the planning, feasibility, and financial modules, as shown in Figure I2. Project definition takes place at the culmination of the identification process, where a port owner has already established the overall port vision and needs, quantified port gaps, and identified potential projects that will fill those gaps. During project-specific planning efforts, detail of potential projects are quantified and project alternatives are formed. While certain project alternatives will be briefly considered and eliminated, the reasonable project alternatives will address the project goals and objectives while giving consideration to social, economic, environmental, and other impacts. Port owners should engage with external stakeholders such as port users, nearby communities, and regulatory agencies to determine possible impacts of the project alternatives. When conducting project feasibility activities, the reasonable project alternatives are subject to a systematic and comprehensive evaluation, and the highest performing project alternative is selected and refined. From the resulting recommended project costs, and the strategy for financing those costs can be identified. The financial project can then be submitted for approval and financing to the appropriate entities. Once the necessary approvals and financing are in place, the project can be implemented. Plans are rarely implemented to perfection, so regular monitoring and periodic evaluation should be carried out to identify shortcomings and to make enhancements. Within and between each model or stage, project definition activities may look back to previous efforts to continually improve the project planning, feasibility, and financing strategy. The activities occurring at each stage can also be iterative and overlapping and might require reconsideration of previous conclusions if conditions change. For example, during the evaluation of a project feasibility, the cost of one component of the project may not return high enough benefit, and the project alternative may need to be revised and amended. Likewise, during the analysis of financing and funding strategies, the sequencing and time of improvements may prohibit the highest financial performance. At that point, the project alternative should be revised, the feasibility re-evaluated, and ultimately, the financing strategy re-examined. Checklist. This checklist provides Toolkit users with a rapid resource for navigating the specific topics in each module, an appendix that relate to specific planning efforts relevant to the development of a project plan. The structure of the checklist is aligned with the titles of key sections in each Toolkit module, including section descriptions to help the Toolkit user determine the topics that relate to their project and financing needs. While the content in each module is intended to guide the users in the development of a project plan, certain projects may not require in-depth analysis or an extensive effort at all the project stages. Some port owners may find value fulfilling federal environmental requirements. If there is a possibility that the potential project will be subject to federal action due to partial or federal funding, impacts on federal lands or waterways, or need for federal permits, then compliance with federal environmental regulations will be necessary. Federal regulations with particular relevance to ports include the Clean Air Act, Clear Water Act, and the National Environmental Policy. For more information, refer to the Environmental Protection Agency, a ports primer for communities, Office of Transportation and Air Quality. Environmental review requirements can be applicable to both comprehensive planning efforts and specific planning efforts. For example, NEPA requires the identification and analysis of potential environmental effects of major proposed federal actions and alternatives before those actions can take place. The principles or essential elements of NEPA decision-making include assessment of environmental and socioeconomic impacts of a proposed action or project, analysis of a range of reasonable alternatives to the proposed project based on the defined purpose and need for the project, interagency participation, coordination, and consultation, public involvement, including opportunities to participate and comment, consideration of appropriate impact reduction methods, including avoidance, minimization, and mitigation, compensation, documentation, and disclosure. In advance of project-specific planning, port owners should determine what environmental studies or other information may be required and what mitigation requirements are likely in connection with federal environmental regulations. While the environmental review process can have implications for permitting and other federal engagement, It is also an opportunity for a port owner to identify and communicate the ways in which a potential project will benefit the local and regional community. Project-level NEPA reviewing and other environmental compliance requirements are discussed in more detail in the environmental impacts sections 2.1.3.4 of the Feasibility Module.